Guy sends me an email. He said, I got a howling noise coming from the rear end, and I'm wondering if I might get some bearings and seals and put in it and fix that. And, you know, just from the tone of the way this guy was saying, you know, he said it changes with speed and all that kind of thing. And I was saying, well, your problem there may be that why don't you just get you a replacement rear axle and put under this thing? You know, buy one from the salvage yard, just change the rear axle and under that. So he comes back and he says, well, I found bearings and seals for like $60 to $80. You know, wouldn't that be cheaper? You know, because I don't have a lot of financial resources right now. Besides that, I work on military vehicles, and so I'm a sort of a mechanic, and we work on these. And I said, okay. So he said, the stuff that I work on is bigger than this, though. So I said, well, you do understand when you start breaking a rear end down, taking it apart, that you can't look at the gears and tell if they're bad, even if they're noisy. Is that you need to go in there and do exploratory surgery and be careful when you're taking it apart, because you put it back together exactly like it was. But there's a lot of stuff you have to know. I said, but if your bearings are brindled or pitted or anything like that, then that's going to mean your bearings are what your noise is. But usually that'll be a roar or a rumble. It won't be a howl. If it's howling and singing and that kind of thing, then you probably got mismatched gears in the rear end. I mean, mismatched meaning that they look smooth and pretty and they look like they ought to be just fine, but they sing. Wing, yang, yang, yang. Now, years ago, the very first time I ever attempted to rebuild a rear end, you know, I had always been successful every time I rebuilt anything else. And I said, well, I'm just going to go ahead and this was back in '78 or whenever it was. And I said, I got some gears and bearings and all that kind of stuff. And I just put that thing together, you know, took it apart. I don't remember why I was rebuilding it to start with. It was one of the cars that belonged to the company I worked for. It was a '77 Plymouth. But something went on back there. I don't know what happened. It may have been damaged. I can't remember. But I pulled the gears out of there, and I had my ring gear, I had my pinion, I had the bearings, I had all this stuff, and I just put it back together like you would anything else mechanical, you know. Take it apart, put it back together, you know, what do you have to know? And so I drove it down the road, and it was yang, 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 and just singing up a storm with the new gears, something awful. And so I called this guy that I had worked with over here in Enterprise, and I said, what do I do about these singing gears? I mean, I put gears and bearings in it and everything, and I thought I did it right. And he said, well, what you're going to have to do is paint the gears like you were painting your porch with something. And then you turn it through, and you're going to have to look at the pattern on those gears so you can make sure that the contact that they're making is like it ought to be. You know, and I've actually got some, one of the handouts you guys get is going to show you what the pattern is supposed to look like on those gears. So you have pinion depth that you got to be concerned with, which is how far in the pinion is. The pinion is that little cone-shaped gear. And then you've got the backlash, which is basically, to change backlash, you move the ring gear from side to side, and to change pinion depth, you go in and out with a pinion with shims and stuff. And then you got a crush sleeve up in there between this little stepped part of the pinion gear and the bearing race on the back side. So it's going to pinch that together. And there, you know what, does anybody in here not know what bearing preload is? All right, do you remember when you were doing those cone-shaped bearings, when you were packing the bearings and all that? Now, the tension that you use when you're turning that nut to tighten those back up, I always tell you, go with your finger and spin the thing until all of the grease is walked out of them and there's no slack there. You've actually put a small amount of preload on those bearings, because you don't want you want those cone-shaped bearings holding this thing in so that it doesn't flop around. You don't want it moving. You want it to turn, but that's all you want it to do. Now on the rear end, you have to put more preload on it than you do on those little bearings on the front. Same kind of bearings, but you got to put more preload on it. And there's a set amount of preload you got to put. And so what I'm going to have you do on one of your worksheets is you're going to be taking you're going to be checking the preload. You're going to need to, you know, pull the brake drums, pull the tires off, because you don't want a bunch of extra drag out here on the outside that is interfering with your measurement. And then you're going to take a socket with some adapters and go up to the socket that holds that flange in the rear end, and you're going to pull that little inch-pound torque wrench, and usually it's supposed to be about 20 inches of turning torque that it takes to keep it going. And if you are putting it, like if you're putting a pinion seal in there and you happen to go too tight with that nut and it pinches those, and I've got a video on YouTube that I posted on there about putting a differential rear end seal in and making sure that you don't. As a matter of fact, we may watch that because it's not very long, but it's got like 330,000 views on YouTube. But anyway, It's really important to recognize the fact that the preload on those bearings is extremely important in the relationship with the gears, those hypoid gears. Now, does anybody know what hypoid gears are? I mean, what do I mean when I say hypoid gears?
The way they are.
Yeah, well, that's a good answer. All right, let me erase the light bulb I drew up here. All right, hypoid gears, you got a ring gear right there, right? The ring gear is actually what's going to be turning your wheels. All right, if I do this, see I've got, you know, 12, 6, you know, I mean, 12, 3, 6, 9. All right, if my pinion gear comes in above or below the center line, if my pinion gear comes in above or below this center line, then that's what my, that's the issue that we call it hypoid. So see, my pinion gear is going to be coming in like this, or it's going to be coming in below it. It's hypoid, and they use a special lubricant, and the teeth are slightly curved, and that's stronger than just having a plant, and not as noisy as having, if it goes in right in the middle, like we saw the older ends, it was just spur gears. You know what I mean? But these right here are better. And that's why we talk about when somebody says hypoid gears, that's all that means. That means that it's coming in above or below that center line. And so, and hypoid gear lubricant is, you know, really. Now, I got another little brief story. Do you know what the differential carrier is? You know what that is? Where's that little set of differential gears I'm always waving around in everybody's faces? The differential carrier is, it's in here somewhere.
It's over there.
It's over there?
Underneath the,
yeah, it's underneath there. Give me that. I'll show you what the carrier is. And I got a short story here to tell you. That's it. Let me see that. That's a differential carrier. It's small. Most differential carriers are larger than this one. I've waved this one in front of this camera many a time. This is a differential carrier. And I was working at the International Truck Dealership back in the mid-'80s. There's this guy that I knew from high school that came in there, and he had an International Scout, and this had popped. It had broke, and it was making a lot of noise. And so you can't look at the gears and tell if the gears drive and they don't have the right relationship with each other, and you drive it very much, you will mismatch those gears to where they're going to be noisy. But you can't look at them and tell, you know. And I was trying to save this guy a little money, and I said, this right here, this differential carrier, I think it was like $250 or something just for that carrier. And we probably should have just thrown another rear end under it. But anyway, I says, I don't know about your gears yet, but I'm going to go ahead and put this carrier on there and get it all put up and set up. Because by this time I knew how to set up a rear end, right? Okay, so I got it all put back together. And when I drove it, the gears had been mismatched because he drove it too far with this thing clunking around, and he messed the gears up. And so he was a sort of a high-strung guy. So the guy that I was working for says, there's another International Scout differential that's laying down there behind the shop. It's been down there a long time, but I think you can probably get the gears out of that one if the ratio is the same. Now everybody knows that on a four-wheel drive, and that was a four-wheel drive, the gear ratios in the front and the rear's got to be the same, right? The relationship between the pinion, the amount of time the pinion turns and the rear gear turns, has to be the same. All four tires have got to be the same size. As a matter of fact, there's a procedure you're supposed to go to if you're having issues with your four-wheel drive. You're supposed to make paint marks on all four wheels and drive the thing a certain number of turns and see if those paint marks stay in the same relationship to one another. Because if you got a tire that's worn more than the other ones, it can cause you issues with four-wheel drive. Okay, here's the long and the short of it is, and that's typically on all-wheel drive stuff, but what we got here is I put it back together, but I went down there and I took the cover off of that rear end that my boss man said that he wanted to take, because the ratio was the same on the little tag on the rear end. I could see that it was. Pulled it off, and that thing was full of water. And those gears were heavy duty rusty. I mean, just big pitted chunks of rust and all that stuff. And I said, and I told my boss man, I said, this is ridiculous. I can't put these gears in there. And he said, well, you know, I don't want to tell a guy he's going to have a $350 set of gears. He said, let's just go ahead and just put them in there. Well, you know, he's paying me salary, so I popped them in there. And I got them all set up and everything. And that son of a gun was just quiet. It made no noise. I mean, I couldn't believe it. Looking at the gears, you'd swear the gears were just, they're going to be horrible. But I've never heard gears any quieter than those. And it may have been because of all those rust pits gave that lubricant somewhere. You know, I mean, that was foolhardy, I thought, but I mean, it turned out okay. And so he wound up driving out there with rusty screwed up gears, but it was just as quiet as it could be. Okay, let's get into powertrains 1. An electronically controlled automatic transmission uses a complex hydraulic system to regulate shift timing. The answer to that question, according to the silly old answer key, is false, but that is actually true, but put false anyway because you don't want to get it marked wrong. And the reason I'm saying that is because anybody that's worked on any of these electronically controlled automatic transmissions knows that in spite of the fact that they're I mean, in the olden days when they first went with electronic shift controls, it made it simpler. But now you've got a really heavy-duty, complicated valve body and complicated electronic shift controls. So just a continuously variable transmission allows the engine to stay within its power band. That's true. Why are we having transmissions that have so many gears now?
So it can stay within this power.
So they can stay within a power band. You got 6-speed transmissions and all this. I mean, in your automatic and in your standard line, you got lots and lots of gears in there. Transverse mountings are used primarily on rear-wheel drive vehicles in which the engine is mounted side to side.
What?
Not rear-wheel drive vehicles.
Front-wheel drive.
Front-wheel drive vehicles, that's right. Okay, so you guys know what a horizontal opposed air-cooled engine looks like, right?
Air-cooled engine?
Mm-hmm. Horizontal opposed. What do I say when I say I'm horizontal opposed? What do I mean when I say horizontal opposed?
As far as the wind.
Huh? The pistons are laid in there like this.
Oh,
Okay,
Volkswagen.
the Volkswagens were like that, but what else was like that?
Porsches?
Corvair and some of the Porsches. Corvair was like that, but it turned in the opposite direction. The engine turned the wrong way. Did you know that you could take a Corvair engine and bolt it up to a Volkswagen transaxle, but you'd have 4 reverse gears?
4 reverse gears.
But you could put the transmission together so that the differential was on the other side. I mean, the ring gear was on the other side, and then it would work just fine. You could literally build that Volkswagen transaxle so that the ring gear was on either side.
I had a friend of
Corvair
mine.
getting any better power?
If it's got a Corvair engine, it would, because it's a 6.
I had a friend of mine used to talk about dry hopping a Volkswagen engine because of the way the pistons were. You set it on the ground, as long as it had gasoline, it would run on the ground.
Yeah.
Just because of the way the pistons were shooting
Yeah.
outside.
Well, it's air cooled, but it's air cooled, but not it's not totally air cooled. It's oil cooled too, but the oil is cooled by the air. There's an oil cooler sticking up in that shroud, and the oil goes through there, and that the oil is actually what cools it and all that. The older Volkswagen Bug engines didn't have an oil filter on them either, and the oil was supposed to be changed every 1,500 miles. And if you were smart, you'd adjust the valves while you were changing the oil, you know. And it's not really that hard to do once you've done it a few times, but there was a lot of maintenance it required. The old Volkswagen Bugs did not have self-adjusting brakes. You had to adjust the brakes ever so often too, you know. So they were anyway. Although the composition of automatic transmission fluid has changed over the years, most automatic transmission fluids can be used in all vehicles. That is false. What is the problem? What happens if you put the wrong transmission fluid in one? Sometimes nothing, sometimes fairly serious consequences. And I like to talk about these clutches, these torque converter clutches that lock the engine and the transmission together, just boom, going, and they actually modulate into that. They go 10% lockup, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, 100% lockup. They work their way up. As they're working their way up, if you've got transmission in there that the friction modifier is either worn out and doesn't work anymore, or because somebody put the wrong fluid in it, you're either going to have one of two things. You're going to have a chattering sensation. It feels like you're running over those little asphalt speed breakers right before you get to a stop sign. You ever felt that? It'll feel like that even though you're driving on a smooth road. Crown Victorias do that pretty bad if they need a transmission service. Another one that you'll feel is surging. And it'll feel like you'll think of, I mean, I've actually, you felt them surge, and I did one time, and that was a little funny story. Back in '89, well, Eagle Summit came out, and this thing, we would drive it. There's this one lady says, I've noticed first on my tachometer, the tachometer was surging, and then the engine would surge. And I initially did some work on the fuel system and all to get rid of a surge, maybe see if the EGR was flowing too much or whatever. And it seemed like whenever I cleaned everything up and washed out, cleaned out the injectors and all that junk with an injector clean machine, she said it was fine for a couple of days and it started doing it again. And so I was thinking, well, the injectors did it before, so I pulled the injectors out of another car and put them in there. There was a brand new car, and it didn't do it for a couple of days, and it started doing it again. I don't know why. And then I called this guy named Dave Farley that was in New Orleans and worked for Chrysler. He said, I want you to go to the Chrysler place and pick up some, because we had Jeep and Eagle, and the Chrysler place was up the road. He said, go up there and get some Chrysler ATF plus 4 transmission fluid and put in that thing. And me and the shop foreman have been beating our heads together on this for, a little while, trying to get this thing straightened out. And whenever he said that, we did our horse laugh. We went, whoa! Well, we did it because he was a field service rep, and we put that transmission fluid in there. It had friction modifier in it, which is this stuff here. Everybody want to smell this? You want to smell it? You need to know what it smells like, because your transmission fluid that has friction modifier in it will have this smell. Won't be as strong, but the smell will be there, right? And if it doesn't have the friction modifier, you're going to feel a surge if your torque converter. Anyway, the torque converter was modulating on that one. And I've noticed that when I put a dwell meter on the line going to the torque converter clutch, I noticed it wasn't a straight lockup. And that was what the deal was. It needed a friction modifier so that torque converter clutch wouldn't chatter, it would slip smoothly. And you use the same stuff in limited slip differentials because they've got little clutches in the rear end. And if you don't have the friction modifier in there when you go to make a turn, it'll do this, you see. All right. So you got to make sure you're putting the right ATF in there. Also, if you're going to pour some automatic transmission through while you're running it to try to soften the carbon before you're decarbonizing an engine, make sure you use type F transmission fluid because it doesn't have silicone in it, and you don't want to cake the oxygen sensors with silicone so that they won't work anymore. Bad news. All right, let's see. Number 4 is in a longitudinal mounting, the transmission or transaxle is mounted front to back. You may actually see that listed in some articles and stuff that you read. They call it, if it's mounted like a pickup truck, with the front and the back, they call that north-south orientation. And if it's mounted this way, they call it east-west orientation. But, front to back is north-south, basically. So, all right. A technician that orders transmission parts needs to know the model year of the car. Yeah. I mean, for some strange reason, the people who wrote that test said that's false, but they need to, I'm going to say this, the technician needs to know more than the model year of the car. If they'd have written that question right and they wanted it to be false, they would have said, all a technician who orders transmission parts needs to know is the model year of the car. Yeah. That's wrong, because basically you're going to, if there's a tag on the side of the transmission, there's a, see all them, have you looked at that up there? How you can identify what transmission you've got in those, that was an old 2000 CarQuest chart, but you can tell by the shape of the pan and how many bolts it has if you know what you're doing, and because your parts guide, you worked at a parts house for a while, is going to ask you how many bolts the pan got, but I can look at one and, like if it's one of the ones I'm familiar with and tell them usually what one it is.
There was one though that it had 2 different shapes for the oil pan, and both of them had the same number of bolts. Yeah,
that's smooth. But they'll also want to ask you about. Furthermore, some of them have got a deep pan and a shallow pan, so you got to know about that too. It's like when you're ordering brake parts, you got 2-inch shoes or 2.5-inch shoes and all that kind of stuff. So basically, if you're calling somebody on the phone and you're trying to, I love it when the parts guy asks me something I don't know though. Like I used to walk into I don't have no way of knowing it. I didn't think. I walk in the parts room over and I say, I've got a fuel tank, a fuel pump for this vehicle here. And he says, is it a 16-gallon tank or an 18-gallon tank? Heck, I don't know. How am I supposed to know? What am I supposed to do? Drain the gas and pump it back in to see how much it holds? Don't ask me a question like that. Well, I've got to know. And then I found out that on the tank there were some numbers that ended with either A or AB. If it was AB, if I remember right, it was an 18-gallon tank. Then I also got to notice that, wait a minute, station wagons all have 18-gallon tanks, and sedans all have 16-gallon tanks. Well, they should have asked me, was it a station wagon? You know what I mean? But they didn't. Yeah, that's right. But the parts, something else that you have trouble with the parts book is not going to use the same terminology that the shop manual does. The shop manual will call something transmission mount, and the parts book may call it an engine mount. Yeah. So it goes back and forth. And I used to fight sometimes with those guys about that. Petroleum-based automatic transmission fluids offer better durability under high temperatures and better lubrication qualities than synthetic automatic transmission fluid. Synthetic is always going to do better, just it is. 8, viscosity additives keep the automatic transmission fluid from becoming too thick at low temperatures and too thin at high temperatures.
True.
That is true. Okay, how many of you know that, and believe it or not, some of these customers are watching their tachometer. You know, the more instrumentation they give a customer, the more they got to complain about. You know what's that? So they would, whenever they started putting tachometers on just about everything, people were noticing when they were driving down the road what their engine speed usually was at what speeds. They would notice that. And so if the torque converter clutch was not working, then they would recognize that because it would have higher RPM. And so the customers come wheeling in there and say, my torque converter clutch ain't working. And so we had to figure out, is it locking up or is it not locking up? And you can basically crowd the throttle a little. And you know, if you're crowding the throttle a little and the engine speed and the vehicle speed are going up together, then it's locked. You got me? If the engine speed is gaining on it, it's not locked. And occasionally you'll see one, that the little O-ring on the tip of that shaft that feeds, because oil is fed out through the torque converter clutches on not on that way. If that O-ring's damaged, it won't. And sometimes that means you got to pull the transmission out, pull the torque converter out, replace that O-ring, and all that hogwash. So that's a fairly serious thing to fool with when you're doing driveline stuff. And but anyway, what if I told you that your torque converter could not lock up for some other reason that was unrelated to the transmission? Yeah, not lock up. What is it? What input to the engine controller prevents the torque converter from locking up on a lot of vehicles? Huh? Coolant temperature sensor. Why? What's the coolant temperature sensor got to do with the torque converter locking up?
Well, if it's too hot, it doesn't want to be any hotter.
Now you're going the wrong way. If it's too cold, it wants it to warm up quicker. And when it's shearing fluid, and it's not locked up, it's getting warm quicker. The transmission is.
But when it's locked up, it doesn't heat.
When it's locked up, you're not producing as much heat. That's another reason for lockup, because the transmission runs cooler. Your silly motorhomes, they're the ones that are calibrated to run on motorhomes and great big giant motorhomes. Those silly things lock up at 22 miles an hour because it's so heavy, you know, and they want to make sure it runs cool. Let's see, common foot powder or a black can be used for finding the source of an ATF leak.
True.
How would you use foot powder to find the source of an ATF leak? Just paint it white with foot powder. You paint it white with foot powder, wherever that oil is coming from, you're going to see it. You can also use foot powder to find. You can also use foot powder to find wind noise. You know, like somebody said, I got wind noise on my door. And let me tell you guys, if you work at a dealership, you're going to get stuck with one of them jobs. Wind noise, you know. But so all you do is you open the door and you spray that Dr. Scholl's foot powder on it. And you close the door kind of gently. You open it back up in the place where it didn't wipe the foot powder is where your leak is. Got me? Something else you can do. You smokers, you guys that like to suck on cigarettes, you can get out there and a lot of places you can smoke in the shop, but you can't smoke in the parts room, stuff like that. But anyway, if you close your doors, and this is getting off track, but I don't care because I like to get off track sometimes because it keeps people from getting too bored. But you close all the doors, you put your AC on vent so that it's pulling air from outside. You turn your blower on high. What are you doing then? You're pulling air from outside, you're creating positive pressure in the cabin, and then you hold your cigarette while the smoke is trailing off of it and follow the seam of the door, and in a minute, if it blows that smoke away, you found your plate. You see what I'm saying? I mean, just common sense a lot of the time. Or you can use your smoke machine smoke. Just go across it, and whenever it pushes out, pack a little stuff behind there to make it happen. Anyway, there's a lot of cool. The people that do stuff like that get good at it. You get where I'm going? There's a noise, and part of this, the driveline stuff is noise, vibration, and harshness. I'm gonna have you guys look for noises too. But this guy one time, this old man, he came and he says, I've got a noise in my little Mustang I drive. He was an old fighter pilot from Vietnam. He'd been around, but he's driving this little 96 Mustang. And he says, and I hear a buzzing noise coming from my windshield area. He said, driving me crazy. And so we drove that thing, fool with it, and they originally gave it to me because they thought it was in the speedometer, and I always pull the instrument clusters and all that crap because I was doing electronics. So anyway, me and a shop foreman drove it together, and he found a jacket laying in the back seat, and he'd hold that jacket here, there, and yonder. And when he got it up in front of his face in the windshield area, he wasn't hearing it anymore. And yay, thank you very much. And so he wasn't hearing it anymore when he did that. By the way, Quincy, here's your 2 volts. Can you catch it? Catch that one? Catch that one. All right, 2 volts. Yeah, there's your hose. We'll have to make something work on that. We'll try anyway. All right. So I don't know what you got there. That's a 15-30 seconds hose that hooks to the breather. Huh? Why does it look familiar?
Too big.
Too big? It's not too big for the breather, but it is too big for the valve cover, and we may have to make an adaptation to that. We're gonna have to make something work on that car, okay? That's what we do, okay? Anyway, the guy holds the jacket up, and then so me and Philip were saying, well, we had to pull the headliner out because it sounds like it's somewhere up in this area. And he said, well, we'll do that later. Let me just go ahead and take the car now because I'm in a hurry. So he takes the car, and then he comes back, and he says, I found this noise, and I fixed it. And I said, what did you find and what did you fix? You know, I mean, if a customer figured it out himself and fixed it. This old fighter pilot was a smart son of a gun. He ain't no dummy. He didn't fall off the turnip truck. He says, I was driving along. I had my hand up here, propped on there, had my hand outside the window, and I felt that same cyclic buzzing vibration on the tip of my finger. He says, and so I kept moving my finger around until I had it right here. And I stopped the car, and I rolled the window down, and I put my head up here, and I looked down my finger, and I was pointing right at the end of my bug deflector. Got me? And he says, and so he got some Velcro and a piece of aluminum, and he put it on the end of his bug deflector where it wouldn't do this in the wind, and all of that noise went away. It was, see how some of that noise stuff is hard to find, you see what I mean? But that old man was smart enough, well, like I say, he was used to doing aircraft stuff. You know what I mean? He was an aircraft guy because he was a pilot. And but me and Philip weren't thinking the same way. He just happened to feel this on his finger. You know, who's going to stick their hand out the window and see if they feel? But he just happened to feel it, you know. All right, so the clutch disc is also called a friction disc. That true or false?
True.
That's true. The pressure plate exerts force or pressure against the clutch disc and clamps it against the flywheel. That's true. Everybody knows that. You guys have been through clutch stuff. Woven asbestos linings are used in older vehicles, but they're no longer used.
True.
That's false. They're still used. If you got that black dust come rolling out of there and you start smelling it, you're probably going to get some mesothelioma issues. So do not even go there. Put something over your face or something. Don't breathe that stuff, guys. Because when you pull the engine and transmission apart, I was training so many people to drive the Escort that one time the clutch just exploded in a zillion pieces. The lining was all apart. So you got to be careful about that. That's dangerous. Wet it if you have to. Let's see. Mechanical clutch linkage uses a series of rods and levers to engage or disengage the clutch. Is that true or false?
True.
Cable linkage is used on both front-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive vehicles. Cable linkage is used on front and rear-wheel drive vehicles for using the clutch. They've also got cable linkage for shifter too.
Not always.
Yeah, but you may find cable linkage on either one. Basically, is what it amounts to. I've had to replace clutch cables on Mustangs in shopping center parking lots before. You know, and hydraulic linkage is used where other types of linkage cannot be used. That's true. You can snake a line over and make anything happen. On rear-wheel drive vehicles, the engine or transaxle must be removed to access the clutch.
Front-wheel drive vehicles too.
Well, actually, you're typically going to, well, it says the engine or transaxle, you know. But you don't have a transaxle on a rear-wheel drive vehicle. No. So that's a false question. Before a clutch is installed, the surface of the flywheel and pressure plate must be oiled. Huh? You don't know all that. You'll make it chatter. If the clutch pedal pulsates, the engine and transmission may not be aligned. True. That's true. If the clutch pedal is stiff, you know, that's one of those dowels are there to make sure that when you pop it in there, the transmission and the engine don't do this and loosen the bolts up. Some people may think, well, I don't have the dowels, but it'd be aight. You know, you put it in there and it works loose a lot of time. The clutch pedal is stiff. The driver may be using it improperly. False. That's false. What will make you have a stiff clutch pedal? You ever put one of these high performance clutches in something? You ever do that? Them doggone things sometimes be so hard to mash you can't hardly push them down. Aluminum has a higher specific heat capacity than steel. Believe it or not, that's true. All right. Anybody got any questions or comments?